Hey you guys, what's up? I just got a new guitar in, so it's a new guitar day, which is great. Except for me, I'm not really a new guitar guy. I like old guitars. New to me, guitar day. My favorite thing are guitars that are a disaster, because to me, honestly, working on them is as much fun as playing them. So let's take a look at this thing, see what we got. I don't want to wash my hands already. This case is just, it's pretty apparent that this case has been sitting for a while and not in a particularly hospitable place. All right, so we've got this thing out of the box and we are ready to take a closer look at it. So let's go ahead and see what we got here. All right, so right off the bat, it's absolutely dead original from the factory. Nothing's been messed with. It hasn't been played very heavily. There's some fret wear, but it's extremely light. I mean, the frets have a lot of life on them. A couple chips here and there. These finishes back then were pretty robust. They were pretty hard to break. They would check only periodically. You didn't get any real excessive checking unless you had a lot of very large temperature swings wherever the guitar was being stored or kept. Some UV damage on the plastic, which is natural. It looks really nice. Strange, this is supposed to be a 54, and it's got a 5-way switch. But you know what though, I've seen that a lot on Japanese domestic model, reissues, where they kind of will push it up to a certain edge and make it extremely accurate looking. And then kind of step out of line once in a while for the sake of practicality and pragmatism, which I really appreciate. I mean, the truth of it is when you look at actually a lot of the Japanese domestic models that Fender was making and some of the Gibson stuff that was available over there, it was a little bit more expressive. You know, the American market stuff kind of stays in a straight line and has a tendency of manufacturing things with a sense of mass appeal. You know, badge engineered products, that can be sold in a market, in a multitude of markets and demographics, and keep the costs low. But with the Japanese domestic market stuff, you see really odd models, you know, things that come out of left field, half scallop necks, reverse headstocks, weird models that you would never find in America. For instance, the Japanese domestic market had a blind faith Telecaster that they made, and it is gorgeous. There's one on eBay right now with the F word scrolled into the back of it, like hard. And it's gorgeous. It's going for about $1,200. Anyway, this thing is fantastic. I really like it. Even though it's poly, it's a thin poly. So it allows a natural degradation. Maybe not as much as nitro, but, you know, a good organic look to it. The sheen is really good. I mean, if you hit this with polish for 20 seconds, it'll come right up. And lucky for me, it looked like somebody had started to dip their toe into relicking here. Got just far enough where they got some scratches in there and kind of left it alone. It's a pity about the pickguard being cut up because, to tell you the truth, this pickguard is an excellent reproduction. And while it doesn't age exactly the way that the Fender Strats would have aged back then, it has a very, very believable bevel on the edge with a softening up around the top. I think the only thing that really gives it away is that the plastic is a little too perfect. It's a little too plate glass. Typically speaking, if you had something from the 1950s back then, the oxidation on the surface would give you a slight imperfection and it would kind of be hazed over. Big clue on this is no checking. Or that if there is checking, that it's horizontal and not vertical. Typically speaking, if you were looking at a 50s model, you would have checking that were vertical and then occasionally deviating and running into each other, like cracks in ice. The neck on this is fantastic. Oh man, this neck is great. I can't wait to play this thing. This thing's gonna play awesome. This neck just is, it's not even broken in and it just feels like such a good shape. A really good welcoming soft V that kind of rolls out and becomes more of a soft C as you get up around the 12th fret. This thing's really nice though. Nickel plating on the tuners. Strange that they would do nickel plating on the tuners and not on the saddles. When you look at the density of these saddles, you can see that this is not the same that they were using everywhere else. The saddles are a little thicker, a little bit more substantial. And when you look at the markings as the screw transitions down into the fold, you can actually see that they cut the threads into it after it had been folded. And the threads extend upward into the base of the saddle. So instead of the screw pushing the saddle fold apart, the saddle fold actually contributes to the hold of the screw, which is pretty good. It's one of those things where you're like, you didn't need to do that, but you did because you were just, you know, focused on it. The quality on these guitars is astronomically good. Type of stuff where it's as good as, you know, California-made stuff from 40, 50 years ago with just only a slightly more robust finish. The artisanship of the Japanese domestic market really filters through on these old reissues, and you find yourself looking at things like the back, you know, spring cover, the trem plate, having the heat stamp of 1954 on it. That's something that Fender doesn't even do on their own reissues. So, you know, one could say that this might have been Fender's version of the VOS, you know, the vintage spec stuff that Gibson is doing now. Okay, so this is interesting. I noticed that when we picked up the guitar that the nut was upside down and was like, okay, that was weird, especially because there were strings on it and the strings were strung up righty. But when I actually looked at the nut, what I realized is that the wide for the low E and high E are in such a way that if we look at the actual nut, the slope is going to the right. So what that means is that it never actually sat on the neck like this with the low E over there. It sat on the neck with the low E on the bottom. So somebody actually had this nut made probably about 30 years ago, because it looks about that old, and it was for a lefty. And if we actually go ahead and look over here, okay, so we can see right here an imprint from a coil. Those are the sides of the coil string, one after the other, resting against the saddle. You get these sometimes when the guitar will fall over and the strings will be compressed down and into the saddle. You know, metal on metal, it just doesn't always work that well. So this guy was a lefty. Now, I don't know how necessarily that would necessitate this. I'm not too sure what was going on there. I think I have an idea, but I'm not totally sure what they were thinking because it seems kind of illogical to make such a cut. But there's a possibility that it might have had something to do with the fact that this person was lefty. You know, maybe they were experiencing trouble with the electronics. They got tired of trying to have to take the pickups out and slide them out from under the strings. They didn't want to unstring the guitar. So they eventually just became industrious and cut a line in this. And, you know, it's very easy for me with all these tools and these resources that I have, because I do have access to a lot of resources. I got tools. You know, there's a hardware store that's like 2 blocks away. Don't know if you've gone there, but it's really good. You know, I'm very fortunate this way, but I also know that when I was growing up in New York, everything was mail order. So there's a very good possibility that, you know, this person was just being industrious. They might not have the time or the money, or maybe they just wanted to not deal with it anymore. And I can't really pick on them too bad because even though this obviously looks pretty choppy, you know, there have been times in the past where people who have been quite substantial artists have done something that really wasn't much better. I mean, Eddie Van Halen, you know, had the cut on the pickguard right here, you know, squared off. And then if you actually look at Jerry Garcia's Alligator guitar, it's the same exact thing. It's got a brass plate that's replaced. And the reason is because these guys were using these things every single night, you know, 3 hours a night. And to tell you the brutal honest truth, after a while, you know, if you're utilizing instrumentation to that degree, you're going to stop looking at it as an instrument. You're going to start looking at it as, how can I make this thing so reliable that I don't get stuck on stage, you know, with my thumb up my nose, you know, because that does happen. So on one hand, yeah, that's unfortunate. But on the other hand, I kind of get it. It's lazy, but I mean, I kind of get it. And it can't be that lazy. Jerry did it. And if Jerry did it, then it's worthwhile because it's Jerry. Still really good. Anyway, let's get some strings on this thing and plug it in.
Just kind of a quick review this week over an old Strat. I've got a sweet spot in my heart for some of the old Japanese-made Strats. You know, back when I was 13 or 14, you used to be able to score those things for like, I don't know, like $399 at all of the Guitar Centers and Sam Ash stores that you could shake a stick at. And then it seemed almost overnight that they started reaching up around the $800 or $900 mark. And now it's been 10 years, and some of them are going for proper vintage money. Aside from my own personal prejudices against poly finish, I do still understand and completely acknowledge that in some cases, for some players, that is a really important point to have on a guitar. I've got a friend of mine who tours endlessly, and he will actually destroy a poly finish with his own sweat because he is playing for 3 hours a night, and admittedly his act is so extraordinary on stage. He's very physically involved, so the guitar takes a real beating. So in that case, he needs something like that. So other than that, these things really are above and beyond the expectations that we had for a lot of those guitars at the time when they were still just out. But even when they were new, they had great broken in necks, they had interesting finishes, they played games with the color schemes and everything like that, and really did make the effort to try to captivate as many buyers as they could, regardless of where these buyers may be. Anyway, great guitar, and I got it for a screaming deal. If you are keeping your eyes open, there are a couple sellers in Japan right now that are getting rid of a lot of really excellent 80s and 90s Fender and Gibson items, and I don't know, the exchange rate might be just going in our favor, but I do have to admit that that guitar came straight from Japan, and then actually one of the Gibsons that we have yet to review yet on the channel also came straight from Japan. So they have, a little bit of something extra kind of added to it. Even if the Gibsons were made stateside, they did have a propensity of making them a little bit more ornate, a little bit more unique, I guess we should say. Anyway, you guys have a wonderful day. Turns out that it is a 3-day weekend. Admittedly, I was so swamped last week, I didn't even realize that, and didn't even know I had an extra day off. So I'm super stoked about that, and hopefully you guys get the day too. So anyway, go ahead and feel free to sit around, play as loud as hell as you possibly can. Granted, hopefully your neighbors are the understanding and music appreciating type, and I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.